coming back from that vacation and being like, oh my God, all I have to do now is go spend 4 hours on the elliptical again.
Oh,
How
God.
exhausting. The thought of that is exhausting me. And I haven't even touched an elliptical yet. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Talks, the podcast that brings you real strategies for sustainable fitness transformation. Today, we're going to be diving into a very common specific strategy that we end up talking a lot about with our clients and with different people who engage with us. And today's topic is, can you lose fat from exercise alone? So can exercise be the sole method or the sole strategy with which you achieve your fat loss goals? We're going to dive into whether or not you can do that and a lot of the important considerations around it, including both challenges and practicalities of trying to make that happen. How do you feel about this topic today, Paris?
It's a good one. Definitely one that a lot of people think about. It is very nuanced, and there's, I think, a lot of things to go over. So we're going to do our best to explain it. But yeah, that classic saying, like, you can't outwork a bad diet. I think that's an oversimplification, but like, it kind of goes with the theme that we're going to talk about today. And a lot of people do ask, like, okay, well, why I don't want to lower my food intake. Why don't I just do a bunch more cardio or something? But it's not really like that. And we're going to explain why it doesn't really work.
Yeah, and we'll get into kind of like the takeaways that people can use to feel like they're in control and also to feel like they can actually still achieve their goals in a very realistic way. Because I think if you are somebody who's listening to this and you're like, well, I've tried to, lose body fat from exercise and I've struggled. Hopefully this episode brings you some clarity in terms of why it's been so challenging, and then also sets you up with a little bit of a game plan for you to take moving forward to make it less challenging. Before we can actually talk about how exercise contributes to fat loss, we actually need to just cover the basics of fat loss first and foremost and how that happens. And this is probably something that people are going to think we're like a broken record about, because we're going to come back to this concept over and over and over and over again throughout not just this podcast episode, but all podcasts. So give us quickly, Coach P, the rundown of fat loss and the requirements for fat loss.
Yeah. So as you probably heard us say a bajillion times, as Courtney mentioned, we need to be in a calorie deficit to lose body fat. So we need to be consuming less energy than we are expending on a consistent basis. There's no way around it. It's a scientific principle. It's how physiology works. So it's not like, I ate in a calorie deficit and it didn't work. It's like, well, then you weren't in a calorie deficit. It's kind of like a box you have to check for fat loss.
Yes, and the visual that I often come back to is like a scale, like, right, where you have a balance and you need to tilt the balance in one way, and tilting that balance towards, higher expenditure than intake, exactly as you alluded to. Naturally, when we're talking about those two sides of the scale, which is expenditure and intake, exercise represents the expenditure side. So can you give us a little bit of a walk through of like how exercise then contributes to the calorie deficit and what role it can play there?
When people think about it, they think it's like the entire output, but obviously we talked about total daily energy expenditure in previous podcasts. So there's different things that contribute to how many calories you burn, but we're specifically in this episode talking about exercise. And I think the main thing that I think people need to realize about expenditure is exercise is such a small portion of your overall daily expenditures. Let's just say somewhere around 5 to 10%, maybe, depending on what kind of exercise and duration, etc. So that's pretty small effect. So we're talking about a variable. We're like, okay, well, I don't want to adjust a major variable like nutrition. Can I just adjust this, what is truly actually a finer variable on expenditure, to see the fat loss results I want to? When you think of it like that, you can kind of see that you're playing a little bit of a losing game if you're trying to get all your expenditure specifically from exercise activity.
I think you just alluded to kind of the first challenge with trying to lose fat from just exercise, because yes, it is a form of expenditure, but the number one thing people need to realize is the magnitude of that expenditure. And so when you're talking about like 5 to 10% of your total daily calorie expenditure, and you're trying to make that a larger share, it's like trying to multiply a very small number. It multiplies very slowly. So you're not necessarily able to expand that expenditure as quickly as you might hope to do, which will definitely change your ability to create that deficit, ability to tilt that one side of the scale. And so I think that's probably the number one reason why it's so hard to achieve fat loss with exercise alone, because it's such a small percentage of your total expenditure. So in relation to that small percentage, the number of calories you're actually burning is probably smaller than you might think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, if you're trying to increase the calorie expenditure, but your efforts aren't burning quite as many as you think, once again, going back to that kind of scale, you're not tilting the scale as heavily as you might think you are.
Yeah, it's kind of like a low leverage lever that you're trying to pull. If we say like, what are the main levers that we can use to create a calorie deficit? It's not, it doesn't have that much leverage, you know?
That's a good way of thinking about it. It's not so heavy. We might be adding like a pebble onto the scale to tilt it instead of like a boulder. And that would be make a big difference. So if we're just trying to stack a bunch of pebbles, it's going to take a lot more pebbles over and over and over and over again to try to actually start to see that move and tilt the balance.
Yeah, definitely.
The number one challenge with trying to achieve a calorie deficit through just energy expenditure and exercise is really the fact that it's smaller than we think it is, right? But there's a lot more to it than that, because when we're talking about measuring calorie expenditure, it's actually a really hard thing to do. What we do know is that it represents a small share of our total daily energy expenditure, that intentional exercise and your workouts, small share, relatively smaller percentage of total calories burned in a day. But we actually don't know how much we're burning. There aren't measurement methodologies that we get to deploy day to day that say this is how many calories my workout actually burned. So even when we are thinking about trying to tilt that balance and create higher and higher expenditure, it's hard to measure. So we're playing a bit of a guessing game.
People, as you said, like greatly overestimate how many calories they actually burn, especially from resistance training in itself. Resistance training really doesn't burn that many calories. And also something to think about is we say, okay, I burned X many calories during my workout, but that's not X many additional calories per se. We have to think of it as the net of what you would have been doing otherwise, and then compared to what you did now. Like, for example, if I was going doing groceries, let's arbitrarily speaking say I burned 200 calories. Okay, I don't know, whatever. It doesn't matter the actual number. And then maybe with my workout, I burned 400 calories. People are like, oh, I burned 400 calories. Like, but it's actually a net 200. So that's just another thing to think about is it's less than you think, and it's not the total extra. It's the net of what you doing versus what you would have been doing otherwise.
Right, because you existing, you're burning calories. So even if you're not working out, you're not just going to be sitting there burning 0 calories. So thinking about that net difference is important. Even then, though, we still don't even know what that net difference is. If we say like the common, let's say, calories burned trackers that we have access to, there's 2 that come to mind for me. One is if you look at cardio machines, which that's one. I'll get into the problems with that in a second. And the second one is if you have a smartwatch or like a fitness tracker, right? And so both of those are complete estimates and actual calorie expenditure. So neither one of them actually gives us an accurate measurement to say, yep, okay, I know I burned X number of calories. Let me add that up and do my math to figure out my calorie deficit for today based on that burn. I'm going to break each of those down quickly. And feel free to like jump in because I think both of us can go on some sprees on this topic. The first one is those cardio machines, right? And I think nothing could be less accurate, or few things could be less accurate than those machines when they tell you how much you burned, right? Because there's nothing on that machine that actually relates to you as an individual using that machine. So when I go on there, so as somebody who's like, relatively smaller in stature, my calorie expenditure by nature of my body composition is going to be lower than yours or a bigger male, let's be honest. But the machine doesn't differentiate between who's using it. And so those machines are always going to overestimate how many calories I'm burning when I use them. And a lot of other people would be in that boat. It knows nothing about me. That's one way I'd be like, don't even look at that. Like, unless you are using it to say, okay, for consistency purposes, I want to reach this.
That's what I was going to say.
So if you're somebody who's using those machines and you're just trying to say, like, use it as a marker of like, I'm going to go until I hit this point, it can be helpful because then consistently, your relative expenditure on that machine is consistent.
Good point.
So that matters. But if you're not doing it for that purpose and you're actually trying to say this is the exact number of calories burned, it's pretty useless.
100%. And not even only in terms of differences in body size and other things, but like on the elliptical, what if one person is doing the elliptical like this? Like if you're not watching, it's like with my shoulder shrug and just moving my legs, and the other person's like dancing or like using their arms like crazy or flailing around or whatever, or somebody's talking while they're doing it, or another person just listening to a podcast. Those are other variables that now are going to affect how many calories technically in that session. Or somebody's, some people do incline walking, but they're like holding on to
Yes.
the freaking bars, which is like, why not just do a flat walking then?
Right.
Anyways, but it's like, versus somebody that's like not holding on. Okay, another difference. So it's like just another reason why don't, again, look at those if you're for consistency over time. If you know you're hitting a certain number, keep that consistent, up or down, whatever, it's consistent. But in terms of absolute numbers, stupid.
Yeah, pretty much useless. We've covered off one way in which measuring calorie expenditure is actually hard. The other is fitness trackers. So if you're sitting there going like, okay, that doesn't matter, I don't look at those calories on the machine, I look at what's on my watch. Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, that's also not that accurate. And there's actually research on this. I actually posted a reel about this maybe about a month ago. Mm-hmm. And there have been research studies that measure even different brands and manufacturers of fitness trackers. And what they've concluded is that those trackers can be off in terms of their calorie estimates by as much as 30%, which is pretty significant, right? So again, the value in that is from day-to-day consistency, or if you're looking to understand an activity relative to itself over time, things like that. Or, some people do get motivated by seeing numbers, and it's like, it's a way for me to just stay focused on increasing my output and my expenditure. But to actually assign a number to a session, a workout, exercise, etc., and say, this is how many calories I burned, that's also not going to be helping you get accurate.
Right. There's only some things in like a laboratory setting that you can do. There's certain variables you can measure in like a lab setting, but like you don't have access to that.
Exactly. And I mean, some of those research studies have obviously compared to like real lab settings and stuff to be able to tell us that things are off by looking just at the fitness trackers. But for those of us who just live our lives every day, those are the two methods I tend to encounter for like measuring calories burned. If you're listening, I'm using big air quotes here. And it's, the cardio machines and fitness tracking apps. And both of those are completely off or inaccurate when it comes to actually giving you an absolute number. So let's do a quick recap of where we're at in our conversation so far around can you lose fat from exercise alone? The first challenge with trying to do so is the fact that exercise actually represents a small percentage of your total daily expenditure. So it is hard to tilt that balance in favor of a calorie deficit through exercise alone. And the second reason is because we don't actually know realistically how many precise calories we're burning through our exercise. So it becomes hard to measure and actually understand the degree to which we are creating a calorie deficit. And so I would say those are the two major reasons why it's so hard to focus on building a calorie deficit through exercise. Those are the functional challenges of like, if we're thinking about it as an equation, calories in, calories out, very functional challenges with getting to that point. But there's practical realities that make it challenging for us as human beings trying to live our lives to do that, to lose fat from exercise alone. Do you want to start with the first one that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, definitely. Like the time cost of like, okay, let's say I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to do a certain amount of cardio and I'm going to keep my calories at this like reasonably high level, but I'm just going to do cardio. And if I'm not getting leaner, then I'm just going to do more cardio. And then if I hit a plateau, then I'm going to do more cardio. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Not only is there diminishing returns, and there's also even proven compensation from your body to slow you down for the rest of the day, so you're not actually getting as much net benefit as you think you are. That's a whole different discussion. But secondarily, what are you going to do? 4 hours of Stairmaster a day? Like, I'm sorry, I don't know about you, but there's work to be done, people to talk to, relationships to uphold, and, other things in life that make life awesome.
Hopefully you have some other hobbies other than spending time on the Stairmaster.
Or some other hobbies like, so you spend all day climbing the stairway to heaven, but like you're not really making that much of a dent as you think you are. So like at just a time perspective, and also then the amount of fatigue that comes with that. As I said, there's a compensation. We already talked about that. It's not additional calories net from what you would have been doing otherwise compared to that. But also like your body does slow you down for the rest of the day, there is a compensation. So you tend to be a little bit more lazy for the rest of the day. Your NEAT goes down, which is just your non-exercise activity. Subconsciously, you slow down a little bit, and you end up burning less calories for the rest of the day when you go hard in the paint on these cardio sessions. And then you're also just like so tired for the rest. Like you probably have no more energy for anything after that. Not to mention, it's going to impact your resistance training, which is actually what's going to hold on to your muscle tissue,
Spoiler alert.
which is a whole next topic and I think.
Yeah. So yes. So what you are referring to is costs. These are major costs of trying to invest in that amount of exercise. 1, time. 2, fatigue. Huge costs to trying to spend so much time and energy through exercise to achieve your fat loss goal. The other trade-off that I think people don't actually think about if they're focusing on just exercise is appetite. I don't know about you, but like the days where I work out in the morning, I'm way hungrier later in the day. And it doesn't even matter if you're doing your exercise in the morning or not. That's just my example of like the relationship between exercise and appetite. If you are now, focusing so much on energy and using so many calories, like if you are actually able to burn more calories, chances are your body's going to feel hungrier. And I think if you don't have a nutrition strategy or any sort of monitoring technique, and we're going to talk about that in a second, the challenge with that is that now you are eating back those calories, chances are.
You could easily eat over what you would have eaten.
Exactly. So you've spent now all this time, energy, you're exhausted, you're starving, and you've done all of that work to get yourself some sort of calorie expenditure level. And now you're going to eat back those calories. So goodbye deficit, right? So without any sort of hunger management strategy or nutrition strategy to complement your exercise, you will likely pretty much stay at a standstill.
Yep. Or even like the appetite spike from the types of exercise that people try to add more and more on, like medium intensity cardio, for example. That's the type of that tends to really, or like HIIT, really is what ramps up your appetite. Like I don't know if you've ever done like a very like a long run or like a boot camp class where they do HIIT or something. Like the appetite spike from that is pretty significant. And then if you're not controlling for calorie intake, you could very easily not only eat back those, but also eat over those, and you might even find yourself gaining weight. So sometimes when people start exercising, they actually gain weight, which sounds mind-boggling, but that's why.
And I do think like it is important to be attuned with your hunger signals and your natural hunger cues, your appetite signals, all of that. That is important. So we are not saying like, oh, just disregard that and don't eat if you're hungry. That is, just want to clarify, that is not what we're saying. What we're saying is it makes it incredibly challenging to adhere to a calorie deficit when you are facing such intense hunger spikes from trying to just force this really high level of expenditure.
Yeah. Even if your calories were controlled, you're just making it way tougher on yourself by like imagine you waking up and going through your day with like zero appetite. It's going to be easier to eat less. Imagine you doing your whole day with like ravenous appetite, like you feel like you haven't eaten in like two days. Like what you could be eating the same amount of food, but like your perception of the difficulty of the diet could be way different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So since we're now talking about eating, let's actually move into why nutrition makes it easier. So I think we've done a pretty good job of explaining that trying to lose fat from exercise alone is very, very challenging. So the complement to that is having a nutrition protocol, game plan, strategies to help facilitate your fat loss. So we're going to talk about how it helps in detail. But before we do that, I just want to go back to where we started, which is the calorie deficit is the thing that we are trying to achieve for fat loss, right? And going back to our imagery around kind of a balance or a scale, the two-sided scale, not like a body weight scale. On the one side, we have our energy expenditure, and that's what we've been talking about so far, how it's really, really hard and challenging to get that level of expenditure up to the point where it outweighs your calorie intake. So the other side of that equation that we can manipulate is the calorie intake. And this is where it starts to actually be a little bit less challenging. Not to say there aren't challenges, because adhering to a diet is challenging, but it is easier than trying to just focus on the expenditure alone. So Paris, What do you think is the first way in which it makes it easier to adhere to a calorie deficit when you have the right nutrition strategy in place?
Yeah. So when you first are like actually consistent with your nutrition, you know when to make adjustments, and it's very easy to, for example, me to remove some rice from my dinner versus going out and trying to burn that extra amount of calories from a time and fatigue cost and practicality cost, like we were
Mhm.
talking before.
Yep.
Like theoretically speaking, it's like, okay, few less bites of rice, now I elicited, a bigger deficit if I need to make an adjustment. But also, I find in practice, calorie adjustments are much more predictable in pushing the fat loss in the right direction versus expenditure additions. Just what I tend to see with our clients, and I would also say that we the way we can think of it is like your in terms of fat loss, when you're making adjustments, your nutrition adjustments are like the sundae, and then the sprinkle on top is the expenditure, and that's kind of the way we think about cardio or expenditure as a tool when we're manipulating into input and output to tip the calorie balance equation to a deficit. Is like the main one's going to be the nutrition manipulation to create a bigger deficit, and then the icing on top and to sprinkle a little bit of sprinkles on it would be the expenditure manipulation.
So, what I'm hearing from you as you're talking through it is really that when it comes to being consistent, the nutrition is the part that we can be consistent with because we do have a little bit more control. It's less of a guessing
Mm-hmm.
game, right?
Yeah,
So, when we think about nutrition tracking measurements, yes, there's always margin of error because nothing exists in a laboratory setting. But our tracking methods can be way more accurate,
mm-hmm.
which allows us to actually know consistently what level we're playing at. And so, if consistency is the name of the game, then tracking your nutrition is much more consistent than trying to track your energy expenditure. And with consistency, it then becomes easier to control, whether that is controlling the degree to which you are consistent, controlling that level, or controlling those adjustments as well, right? Like you said, taking it's not even a difference of like 3 seconds to change the amount of rice you put on your plate. But if you're trying to change, find that extra 100 calories in how you burn it, it's going to be a lot more challenging, a lot more costs involved.
Very true.
Ultimately, nutrition gives us three key benefits. One, consistency. Two, accuracy. And three, ability to adjust based on the fact that we know we're being consistent and accurate.
Exactly. And depending on the person too, there's a mixture of nutrition and expenditure adjustments. I know we're big on steps and adjusting those too, but like the most predictable outcomes are going to happen from the nutrition adjustments, and depending on the person, you might pull those levers in with different magnitudes. But
That's an important point to recognize, right? We're not saying forget exercise. That is definitely not what we're saying. But what we're saying is exactly what you alluded to with your analogy is like the foundation of your sundae, that big honkin' scoop of vanilla ice cream or whatever flavor of ice cream you want, is going to be nutrition. And then the sprinkles get to be your exercise.
yeah, when talking about expenditure, yeah.
Right. When, again, yes, all of this conversation is in the context of creating that calorie deficit. So creating that net difference between expenditure and intake. One thing I do want to bring up is there's a couple of hidden, what I'll call like hazards or watchouts around focusing on exercise for that kind of like calorie burn or calorie expenditure. And I do want to talk about them because they're things that I've seen and I've witnessed either myself or through other people and our clients and things like that, that I think like are important to acknowledge as the downsides of being so focused on exercise for energy expenditure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the first one is actually that in itself, being so focused on exercise for energy expenditure.
It's a mindset.
It's the mindset. Yeah. Because if you are approaching your exercise being like, my goal for exercising is to burn calories, that is a really, really, I'm going to just say problematic mindset to have around exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it forces us or forces you to think about success with exercise as calories burned. And not only can that be a little bit disordered because you get fixated on that output, but it really just denies the actual benefits of exercise. Like, why are we exercising to begin with? Even if we have a fat loss goal, exercise is a health mechanism, first and foremost. We exercise for all of the benefits that it brings us for health and well-being. whether that's prevention of chronic disease, whether that's increased mobility, strength, function as we go through day to day. And yes, putting on muscle mass and losing fat,
Brain,
your brain health.
optimizing your brain,
Yeah.
brain health and productivity, energy, mood,
100%.
mental health.
Mental health,
Yeah.
all of those things. So there's so many benefits to exercise. So if you're going into your sessions and thinking, my job here is to burn calories, no. Like I just have to shut that down a little bit.
Yeah. And again, like if you're in a fat loss phase, like, and you're going to do extra steps, yes, the goal is to burn calories in that sense. But I think especially when we're talking about training, the majority of your training should be resistance training. All right. Like, let's say that's the bread and butter. And the mindset going into resistance training is to maintain strength, and build muscle, and so that you have shaped your body. It's not to expend energy. Like the mindset of going into the gym to lift weights and burn calories or burn fat is flawed. We're going there for the other benefits of weight training, also, like, a metabolic baseline metabolic boost. We'll say potentially it's more for strength and muscle mass rather than expenditure. Like that's not the goal for resistance training.
Yes, and this is, that's a topic for another day that we can expand on, like the reasons why resistance training is so beneficial, and not just for aesthetics, like obviously for aesthetics, but for other health-based reasons too. Resistance training is so clutch. We'll talk about that another day, but I think the reason we wanted to bring it up today is just to say that mindset around exercise and burning calories can be very damaging and denies all of those other benefits. So I think that's number one. And number two number two problem with thinking about exercise as the only thing that's going to help us lose fat is actually going back to your notion that resistance training is so beneficial and purposeful, is that it kind of overvalues specific forms of exercise. Because you said this earlier in the podcast, right? Resistance training is actually not the form of exercise that burns the most calories. So if you're chasing the calorie burn, you're going to be focusing most likely on the two things you alluded to earlier: HIIT training, so high intensity intervals, or that kind of like medium intensity steady state. So you think about somebody on the elliptical, like really going for it, right? And yes, in theory and in practice, those two methods do burn more calories. But what it does is deny the role of resistance training, which again has a lot of functions, both from preserving muscle mass when you are in a calorie deficit, and also very many additional health benefits and physiological benefits.
Yep. And I think that's where people go wrong, because even if you're trying to get like super, super lean, if you're, we'll just call it cardio, we'll just blanket things under cardio. If your cardio is starting to interfere with your recovery and performance from your weight training, you have an issue. And at that point, you need to reassess your strategies. Like, you shouldn't be at the point where you're like, oh, you know what? This cardio session now is taking all the energy, and now, oh man, I'm going to my leg day, and I'm under recovered, and my performance is affected because of how much damn cardio I'm doing, right? And there's a lot of strategies to mitigate that, but like, you want to think of preserving your resistance training performance, and that progression is like your primary focus, and the other stuff is sprinkled in around it. And if that other stuff's starting to interfere, you need to adjust the way you think about things, or your systems.
Those are both two good reasons. We've just cited two good reasons that why focusing on exercise for calorie expenditure can be problematic, right? Okay, so we started off with the question today of, can you lose fat through exercise alone? How would you answer that question? We just spent 30 minutes trying to answer that question, but how would you answer that as a one-liner?
I would say, I'll give my like brief summary. It would be like, let's say you chose like a reasonable, relatively reasonable calorie level for you, and then you did up your expenditure. You could potentially, but if your calorie levels are fluctuating and you're not accounting for a consistent calorie level, it's a very much a losing game, and you're most likely just going to spin your wheels.
You basically said it's possible if you're also doing nutrition.
Yeah.
So
if you're at least controlling, so it's a losing game.
Yeah.
There we go for people in the back.
I think there's a very big difference between theory and practice, too, right? Oh, yeah. Like, theoretically, you can. In practice, it is really not realistic. And even theoretically, it's hard because of that percentage of total daily energy expenditure that actually comes from active
And
exercise.
the lack of predictability with progress and inconsistency with progress that you would see, I don't know about you guys. If I'm putting effort into something, I sure want a high probability of me seeing some sort of results. And fitness is so cool in the fact that like it's one of the only things in life where we are in pretty much control of most of our journeys because the decisions we make drive progress, like almost one to one in some aspects. And if you think about it, comparatively to other aspects of life, so it's like if I'm going to put all this effort into something and I might get some results sometimes, like I would hate that. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm going to bust my butt to do some hard work, I want to see some results.
Yeah, and also you want to know where those results are coming from.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that is
exactly.
and that is one of the challenges with our fitness journeys in general is there's so many potential variables that sometimes it's actually really hard to say this thing is causing this outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So with the exercise variable being so variable, and like you said, it's hard to control from one day to the next and all that, then it makes it really hard for us to say, is this actually having an impact? And is this letting me see progress? Because whether or not you're seeing progress is one thing and it can be highly frustrating, but not knowing what's driving it is even more frustrating.
And not to go on and off on a tangent, but like a lot of people that let's say you're in shape and I don't know, maybe you got injured, you go on vacation or whatever, and then you can't train for a while and you can't eat the way you want to and you regress in terms of your physique. It's only stressful if you don't know how you got that physique in the first place. Like if I let's say I went on vacation, I was like, I'm just this would never happen because it's not my how I think, but like I'm just gonna have a grand old time, drink a bunch of wine, have a lot of pasta. I'm not gonna do any workouts, any steps, and
Sounds
I
like
do
you're
that for
going
two
to
months.
Italy. Wine and
Sounds
pasta.
like yeah, seriously. And again, I would never do this because why? But anyways, but let's say you can't. I came back and I was like, and my physique was like completely regressed. I'm like, oh my god, it wouldn't be that stressful because I know exactly what I need to do to get back to that. It's only stressful if you don't know what to do and you don't know how you got that physique in the first place.
Mhm.
That is stressful.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I'm just thinking about coming back from that vacation and being like, oh my God, all I have to do now is go spend 4 hours on the elliptical again.
Oh
How
god.
exhausting. The thought of that is
Yeah.
exhausting me. And I
Yeah.
haven't even touched an elliptical yet. Right. So knowing gives you the confidence to move forward. But knowing it's also something that's realistic and possible, it boosts the
Mm-hmm.
confidence even further. When you're like, I know what I
Yeah.
have to do and it's realistic for me to do it. Right.
Yeah, and I do want to use a personal example. I know I don't want to go on this too long, but it is important to touch on. When I had my like headaches and vertigo, if you remember
2021.
2021, I actually did take almost 3 months off like hard training, and my physique did look a little bit like a bag of milk compared to what my
Compared
standard
to,
is for myself,
yeah, so
right?
you have a very high standard for yourself, of course.
Yeah, yeah, but like but it wasn't stressful for me for some reason. Like I was at peace with that, and even when it sucks because training for me is more of a mental health thing. It keeps me sharp. It keeps me extremely sharp, and I love that being sharp, obviously. But I didn't have that, and it sucked not having that outlet. But then at the end of that, when I was looking in the mirror, I'm like, wow, this is kind of soft for my standard. It wasn't that stress. I was actually at peace with it because I was like, I'll just do X, Y, Z, and like we'll make it happen again. You know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think like, in those moments too, you also zoom out. You really do zoom out and say, okay, your physique was not the important thing in that moment, which also
Mm-hmm.
helps you move forward. But then when your physique becomes important again, as you move past and you've recovered on that vertigo and headache piece, then you know what to do.
Yeah, yeah, and like I had to recover health wise in order to then get my physique goals on point too. So it was like, okay, I gotta like give it up for a little bit short term sacrifice on the physique for the long term development,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I just want to share because some people I think have dealt with like similar layoffs and then they get discouraged. But it's like it's stressful if you don't know what to do. So,
for
anyway,
sure.
side tangent, but important combo.
Important, right? And I think it just goes back to the fact that trying to do the exercise piece alone and burning all these calories through cardio sometimes can be an unknown, and so it creates a sense of I don't really actually know what to do. So I'm gonna take a moment and do like a little bit of a plug. If you're watching this and you're like, I kind of feel like I don't know what to do. Hey, we're here for you. We're here to
We
create.
really do know what to do.
We think we do. We're pretty sure we do. Our clients say we
I hope
do.
so.
Um, and so if you do need some support in figuring out, what those next steps are for you, or how you want to achieve your fat loss goals through a combo of exercise and nutrition, we're here to guide you. On that note, our takeaway for you all today is if you do have a fat loss goal, exercise plays a role, but trying to do it through exercise alone is incredibly challenging, very difficult, a huge guessing game, and probably not that practical. So please do consider establishing your calorie deficit first and foremost through a tailored nutrition strategy for you. Like Paris said, I'm going to go back and use his ice cream sundae analogy. Whatever flavor you want of ice cream is the base. That's your nutrition. The exercise becomes the sprinkles on top. So that is our takeaway for you guys, is this nice, tidy ice cream sundae for you to take with you and consider as you build towards your fat loss goals. Ice cream sundaes and fat loss goals? Are we just driving a whole bunch of confusion here, or what?
We're crazy. But no, guys, thanks guys and girls or just people.
Fitness enthusiasts.
Yeah, fitness enthusiasts. Thank you very much for listening. If you listen to the end, like seriously, we do really appreciate it because Courtney and I are trying to bring a lot of value in these episodes, and the support gives us positive reinforcement to make more content like this and keep making content. And again, if you have any topics, like we are here to serve you guys. If there's anything you want us to talk about, like we can talk for days, as you might notice. So we can run it up.
Yeah. And like Paris said, if you have a question you want us to answer in this format, in this longer format where we go deep into the topic, send it our way and we'll be sure to cover it in a future episode. All right, everybody. With that, we will be wrapping it up for this week. We will see you next Monday back in your feeds. If you haven't already, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.